Hot Seat, where we explore the people, decisions that shape organizations, careers, and cultures. Today's conversation is a special one. I'm joined by Henry Goldbeck, someone who has spent decades building not just a recruiting firm, but a reputation rooted in trust, long-term relationships, and thoughtful judgment. Over the years, Henry has seen the recruiting industry evolve through economic cycles, shifts in leadership expectations, and massive changes in how organizations think about talent. And through it all, he built Goldbeck Recruiting with a clear focus on people, how they're hired, supported, and guided through important career moments. And that work didn't happen quietly. In 2025, Goldbeck Recruiting was recognized by Forbes Canada as one of the country's top recruiting firms, truly a reflection of the consistency and integrity behind the business Henry built. Henry brings a perspective that only time and experience can offer, and today's conversation is all about looking back at what's changed, what matters, and what we can all learn from building relationships that last. Henry, thank you for joining me, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great being here.
Henry, you're so enthusiastic and you bring so much joy into the recruiting and also to the team. And so I'm really excited for our conversation today. But why don't we start at the beginning? So when you first got into recruiting, what did the industry actually look like and what pulled you into it?
Well, I was pulled into it accidentally, through a family contact. One of the larger recruiting firms at that time's the partner's father had come over on the boat from Germany with my father around 1952. So that was the introduction. And I'd sold life insurance to the partners and hated selling life insurance. So they offered me a job of a recruiter, and I accepted. And and that was about 39 years ago.
Wow. And you never looked back.
I never considered leaving. I didn't always like, contingency recruiting can be a difficult, stressful industry, and I feel for it for our recruiters. But at the end of the day, it's a good living, it's an honest living, it's an important service, I never thought of leaving it.
Yeah, amazing. And so after being in the industry for 40 years, like what's changed the most that you've seen and what hasn't changed at all since the beginning?
It's crazy how much has changed. So when I was in the industry, we used to receive resumes by mail, by a folded resume in an envelope. We used to send resumes to clients by mail. And if it was urgent, we'd courier them. And then when faxes came about, there was big discussions. Can we send a resume by fax? Well, can we trust that? Should we do that? And, some of the recruiters, I remember, had a lot of resistance to using a fax, right? So, from mail to fax to email, the technology has changed. The tools we've used have changed, right? So when I started, advertising was the biggest expense. Newspaper advertising for the larger career ads and the classified ads, that was the biggest expense. And then after that, the companies like Monster, etc., who had online databases of candidates, was the biggest expense. And now it's mostly LinkedIn. In North America, LinkedIn is what almost every recruiter uses, unless they're in a real specialty field like the trades or something like that. And it's a big expense. And we need LinkedIn. And I feel the same way. We needed the newspapers, and we sort of hated the newspapers. We needed Monster, and we hated Monster because we needed them. And now we need LinkedIn, and we pay them a lot. But I don't hate LinkedIn, because actually LinkedIn is the best tool recruiters have ever had in the 40 years I've been in this business, right? It's a great tool, and I find it's worth the money, right? So, that has changed a lot. I think the other thing that's changed is recruiting has become more prevalent, especially in our market in Western Canada. When I started, there were very few recruiting firms. Many firms Many employers didn't know how it worked, had never used a recruiter, wouldn't consider using a recruiter, didn't know what it was, right? Uh, so there was a lot of education in terms of how this works, what we can do for you, and yeah, give us a try, right? Now, obviously, every employer, whether they like recruiters or they use them or don't use them, they all know what it is and they all know it's an option, right? And then I think finally the last biggest change, I wouldn't say last, maybe I'll think of something else, but another big change is, so much of our competition comes from in-house recruiting, right? HR has professionalized, human resources wasn't an important position. It wasn't seen as important, often for some smaller, mid-sized, obviously for the large companies with big unions and labor relations. Obviously, they would have it in big benefits departments. They would have large, important HR departments. But, for a lot of times, HR was where someone went to, you didn't find anything else for Joe to do, so you'd put him in human resources, right? And obviously that's changed tremendously. The professionalism, the education, the different tools, the understanding of their impact on culture, uh, on salaries, on training, everything to do, with an organization can be impacted by human resources. And HR people have become talent acquisition experts as well, right? And the larger the firm and the faster growing the firm, the more the investment into the talent acquisition side of HR. So, many times we will have searches by companies who have a talent acquisition team that's doing most of their hiring, and they would come to us as recruiters for specifically difficult, onerous, challenging positions that their own department hasn't been able to fill, or when it's confidential, or if there's other reasons to go outside. So those things have changed tremendously. What hasn't changed, I would say, is the need and AI. There's for years they've been talking about whether AI would replace individual recruiters, and obviously that conversation is growing. But I don't see it yet, and I don't see it on the horizon where a candidate in a niche, in a skilled, experienced position, both industry and function, who's working and productive, is going to risk their confidentiality or risk their future on dealing with AI as an initial outreach, right? It
Mm-hmm.
still takes, so far, it still takes a human individual to make a respectful call that that person can trust enough that, if they were interested in exploring an opportunity, they would have an honest, confidential discussion with that individual about their career, their future, their qualifications, their interest or not lack of interest in a certain position. And then that would be, acted on or not acted on discreetly and confidentially by a professional recruiter. And that's where we make a living still. I don't see that changing. For some firms, I think where AI will be make an impact, and is already making an impact, is for large companies that are hiring hundreds and hundreds or thousands of people a year. Like I was thinking about that, like Starbucks. How many baristas does Starbucks need to hire a year? So, and what part of their process can they do via AI? I'm sure they're doing some of their process already. Um, but you know what? There may be parts of their process that still needs the human touch. Are they going to trust AI to deliver a candidate? That candidate is going to show up on Monday and be a fit for Granville and Georgia Street branch, right? So the human element will probably still play a role even in those types of positions at some part of the process.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's it's just so crazy to see like the different evolution of how recruiting's become, and as it evolves, like the different milestones that you're able to unlock from a recruiting perspective, and that involves the clients and the candidates, and it's very incredible actually, and over time how that comes to unravel. And I totally agree, like with AI, like there's going to be different ways where you're able to automate certain things and make things a little bit more efficient, but having that human touch, that's something that is not going to be replaceable. And so it's how you frame yourself in that, to be able to add value. And so, yeah, we talked a little bit about like change over time, but with that also comes judgment, and how we kind of look at candidates and how we screen and all that process that the recruiters handle themselves. And so, like, what have you seen, what do you experienced recruiters learn to see in people that's typically hard to teach or to automate when it comes to, and we were talking about AI earlier. What is that you see?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, and you starting from the recruiting process, right? Is the intake call with the client. Every position is different, even if it's the same title. If it's a senior accountant in a construction company, or if it's a sales representative for a IT company or a consumer products company, it could be the exact same title, account representative, senior accountant. The position is going to be totally different. You can't just say, okay, this, I have this person, I could put him in 5 different companies. No, every company has their own requirements, their own, what they value higher than others, what experience they value or don't value, what's important to them, and what turns them off, right? So listening to the client is really important, listening to them with an open mind, asking questions, having enough experience to ask smart questions, to challenge sometimes the client is how this works for them, given what you've seen in the market, right? So really trying to understand that, and then beginning the search there. And then the research part of it as well is like, we've had, so many researchers over the years. And right now, we probably have the best researcher I've ever seen in the industry. And being able to look at hundreds and hundreds of profiles on LinkedIn. And when you look at research, so there's, you have 2 extremes, right? You could send every resume, without filters to the recruiter. So the recruiter has to go through like the same 500 resumes you went through,
Yeah.
or you can send nobody, right? Because, a lot of times you do research, so it's not the perfect candidate there, but there are numbers of candidates who could be a fit based on their history and their experience and their location, their level of their job, their level of time in the job, the technology that might be reflected on their LinkedIn profile, all of those things, or their experience in related or parallel industries, or related or parallel functions, right? So understanding the position that the recruiter is working on and making those judgments as to, okay, based on what I understand, this person could be a fit, and adding them to the list. And it's really easy to do that wrong, either by adding nobody or adding the wrong
Mm-hmm.
people, right? But developing that judgment and understanding of the environment, like, what say what are all the range of sales positions or of accounting positions, and the types of firms, and how a sales position may look in one type of firm versus another type of firm, and or parallel firms, which industries have similarities with other industries where the person could be a fit to cross over into another industry. So all of that takes, caring about it, and thinking about it and applying judgment, and then learning as you go. And that, that's so valuable. And that's a real human skill with no black and white hard edges,
Yeah.
right? And then on the recruiting side as well, is then when you're reaching out to people, how to do it respectfully, depending on the position. And then really when you're talking to people, first of all, ideally you want someone who's a perfect fit, who wants the job, right? And, sometimes we'll have the perfect fit who doesn't want the job. will
Mm-hmm.
introduce someone who really wants a job but isn't a fit, right? And you have to do it. You have to do it efficiently. You can't spend an hour with a candidate who's not doesn't want the job, uh, uh, or spend an hour with a candidate who you should have found out in the first 5 minutes that there's something. It's the salary, the location, the industry, the role. That's a non-starter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to feel your way into the interview and cross off qualifiers as you go, and then get deeper and deeper into it, right? At the same time, being respectful to the candidate who may or may not be interested. It may or may not be a fit for that person. And, it's really easy. And, in our years in the industry, we've seen recruiters who's going to tell every single candidate that this is the perfect job for them. Well, that's just stupid and disrespectful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is going to send every candidate who's interested, the clients, finding a way to say that this candidate is a perfect fit for your job. Well, that's really stupid and disrespectful. So, how do you go about efficiently and
Mm-hmm.
respectfully speaking to these people, and going through their history, being respectful, finding out if it is a fit for them, and then presenting them, right? And you have to do that. And then the client you could do your very best there and think it's a great fit, but the client just says no for whatever reason, right? Because clients are human too. And
Yeah.
as much as they tell you in the intake call, yes, this is what we want, this is what we'll expect, um, et cetera, find this person and we'll hire them. Very often you don't know what they really want or
Mm-hmm.
really will hire until they see a resume. And then
Yeah.
you start finding out, well, actually, no, we don't want to be that broad in the parameters. We really want to be more narrow, or actually we said we would go up to this salary, but actually in reality we won't, right? So, and then as a recruiter, you learn those things, you move on, you keep the process going. You have to be efficient, you have to be effective, you have to be respectful, and and you don't give up until you fill the position, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And I think a reoccurring theme there that I heard is doing things with care and respect. And I think that's super important when it comes to, because we're dealing with like real people, their real livelihoods, and also building that respectful relationship with them. And so you built your firm on long-term relationships. And so why do you think trust still matters so much in hiring, even with all the technology that's available today?
Well, I think people want results. Companies want results, and candidates who are working don't want to put their job in jeopardy, right? So it's just a matter for us. It's always been, for me and for the team, and our team is terrific. It's always been, this is one potential fee for us, but this is someone's mortgage, their car payment, their kids' daycare, right? It's their life. And for the company, there's a huge expense to put the wrong person, in that position. So again, we're not perfect, and nobody in recruiting is, because we're dealing with humans. And since Freud initially tried, nobody, has the blueprint. There's still, we're mostly unknown inside our heads. So you try your best to be transparent and respectful and and honest. And if you do that, you're going to be right a lot of the time. And people sense that. Again, if you have a client and you're sending them 5 resumes and telling them every resume is a perfect fit, you're going to lose trust,
Mm-hmm.
pretty quickly, right? That's then a lot of recruiting, especially contingency recruiting, has a used car salesperson reputation for that reason. And the same thing with candidates. You can tell every candidate is the perfect job for them. People aren't stupid. They see through that, right? And they're not going to trust you.
Yeah.
So it's not rocket science, but it's also the right thing to do, right? We feel really bad. And it's not like we haven't put someone in a position where it really worked out poorly for that candidate. That's happened. That's happened to every recruiter, if they're being honest, right? And we feel bad when that happens. That sucks, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
don't want to feel that. We want to feel that as little as possible. And the same thing working with clients.
Yeah, yeah. And in working with clients, it takes, earlier you mentioned that it's like a dance, right? You have to ensure that we're finding what they're looking for, as well as what the candidate is looking for. So it's a little bit of a dance back and forth to actually figure out who is the right fit. So what's one hiring mistake that you've seen companies repeat for decades, regardless of market conditions?
I would say a pretty consistent indicator, like a failure, would be hiring too quickly.
Mm,
There's two things, right? Companies, if you have an employer who's going to hire, like fall in love with a candidate early on in the process, not look at other candidates and really hire really quickly, I would say the odds of that not being successful are much higher than most. So, clients, we tell clients they should try to interview between 3 and 5. Obviously, it's our job. We don't want them to interview people for the sake of interviewing. They have to be qualified. We want them to interview 3 to 5 qualified candidates, right? And then have multiple interviews of their short list. Have 2 to 3 interviews, and then check references thoroughly and do background checks, right? Have other people within the company meet that person, right? So again, there's no elimination of risk of a bad hire or a hire that doesn't work out. It's not, you cannot,
mhm,
no one can guarantee that, right? But you can eliminate risk by seeing enough candidates, by doing enough interviews so that you can reflect a little bit and learn. For example, when you're interviewing somebody, it's like a first date. There's a first date, there's a second date, there's the third date. Every date you get a little bit more honest, right? And the same thing with the interview, and then the interactions. When you ask for references, do they get back to you? When you set up another call, do they respond? How professional are you? Sometimes that really changes,
mhm.
right? So, because they're on their best, if they want the job, they're on their best behavior to start. But we used to ask back when all the interviews were in the office in person, and we would ask our receptionist, how was so and so?
Mhm.
Because and sometimes they would say, yeah, he was really mean to me, or he was rude. Of course he's going to be nice to me. I'm the
Yeah.
recruiter. I've got a job he wants. He's going to be so nice to me. But to Jing at the front desk, how is he going to treat her? So
Mhm.
it all adds to your information base. And that's why, yeah, I would say 3 interviews you should do your reference checks. You have to specifically ask for past employers or bosses or past supervisors or other senior people in the company. Coworkers, they'll give you the coworker that likes them the best, right? Customers, they'll give you their favorite. The worst salesperson in the world has got one customer that loves them. That's who they're going to give you. But if you can't choose who you reported to, you can't choose who the CFO in your company was, who the president of your company was, right? Those are the most consistently reliable references, and you need to check enough references that you see a pattern, right? If you check your 3 to 4 references, you will see a pattern. You'll see an enthusiasm in the reference, or a guardedness, or qualifying of the reference, right? All of those things are really important.
Mhm.
And when you talk about mistakes being made in hire, and I look back on my career, and it hasn't happened for a long time because I was probably learned that lesson too slow, but sometimes people have most amazing reasons why they can't give references,
Mhm.
right? And that is that's a big sign of a big mistake waiting to happen, right?
I'm just
So
curious, what would be one example that you could share
oh
of an
man,
excuse?
it's been a long time, but they just say, oh, this guy's moved out of the country, or this or that, or I don't know where he is, or they just, the dog ate my lunch, ate my homework kinds of things. And, and you want to believe the person because he's so nice. And, every now and then you run into people who lie all the time become really good at it, and they're not common. But every now and then, you'll meet somebody who is really good at it, and that's because they do it a lot, right? So, and that's where having a hard and fast rule about references can really help avoid mistakes.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Henry, for outlining that. I think it's really good to have like a sequence of events that has to happen to ensure that there's due diligence and that you're thoroughly vetting the candidate before onboarding them. And from your experience like working with leadership teams and hiring managers, what have you observed when it comes to the separation between leaders who consistently are able to build strong teams from those who find themselves rehiring over and over again?
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. It's such an interesting question, right? Like, I mean, the best situation is you place somebody and they're not looking for work again for 10 years, right?
Mhm.
Circumstances happen, and some people, you place and they do really well in a job and they're really valued by the company, but for whatever reason, their job it ends. Maybe and that can happen. There are employers that go through a lot of people, and those are really difficult. And sometimes we don't, now it's easier with online reviews and Glassdoor and things like that. But it's usually first of all the expectation, sort of the hiring can be done in an immature way, right? If they hire too quickly, as I already said, if the expectations are really unclear when they hire, if the expectations are unreasonable, say like in a sales position, right? And maybe a company hasn't hired a lot of salespeople successfully in the past, or maybe they're stretched financially and they hire a salesperson, and then they go over and above their planned salary range to hire that person, and then there's an expectation that salary is going to be net positive in terms of sales results really quickly, and that usually just wrecks things, right? So understanding what the expectation is and having it clear between both parties really helps that situation. And then some employers are just like, they're like everything else. Every now and then someone is a whack job, right? And they can be mean, they can be rude, they can change their mind. Sometimes they own the company, so they get away with it for a long time, or they have good relationship, or they do something really well, but they're going to have a lot of turnover just because of their management style. And again, I would say that's a really small minority in the companies we work with, but you can't say it doesn't exist. In terms of expectations, one of the things that I really think companies should do to increase the odds of success, of a new employee. And by the way, Harvard and other places, Harvard Business School and other places, there's been a lot of studies that, especially at a senior level, the the success ratio is lower, significantly lower with leaders hired from outside the organization than from, people promoted from within. So that's something that needs to be understood when you're hiring. And it doesn't mean, a lot of times you don't you need to hire from without, right? And as much as a recruiter, I would like them to get that phone call every single hire they're going to make, really. But, a good company is going to look seriously at their internal talent before they go outside, right? But if they are going outside and they do hire, I think one of the really great things they could do is do oh, sorry, my mind went blank. Do any evaluation up front. So in 3 and 6 months or a year, whenever this person is going to be assessed for their success in the company, right?
Mhm.
I think they should sit down. That should be part of the onboarding process for the new employee. Is this is how we're going to evaluate you in 3 and 6 months in a year, and it's like a performance proposal, but at the beginning of the employment. So the employer and the new employee knows, well, this is how I'm going to be evaluated, and it's written down in black and white, and they're both signed on to it. That guides, it really gives clarity to the employee. Oh, this is mission critical for me, right? I've got to get these things done, and this is the time frame. That's great. I know what I need to do, right? And that can be broken down and granular. If there's sales is an interesting way to look at that, because coming in, there's a sales cycle. You can't necessarily say in 2 months I'm going to have all these sales, but I want you to have reached out to all these old clients. I want you to have made these new contacts, this many presentations, this type of research on your territory, whatever, right? So they know what they have to do, and the employer then can know, okay, yeah, this person is hitting the marks. There's no guessing. Are they okay? I'm not sure. He comes into the office, he has his coffee. You can't look inside, can't look inside his head, or take his temperature, right? But you have guideposts. And I think if companies did that, it would really increase the ratio of a successful hire.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think we're seeing that a little bit more today, where they're incorporating evaluations and test projects and certain assessments. But I totally agree. Like, the more that we're able to do that, the more alignment that our clients will have, or clients in general will have, with their candidates after the onboarding process. Because too often once they're onboarded, there's a mismatch and they're not able to actually perform in the
Absolutely.
seats. Yeah.
Or like one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. They're busy. A lot
Yeah.
of times people get hired. It's like, oh, where's the onboarding? Here I
Yeah.
am at my desk. I guess I better figure out what to do. I'll go ask somebody, right?
Yeah,
If they really
totally.
clearly know what to do,
Yeah.
then you're going to have more success. A lot
Yes.
of times we'll get calls from clients or candidates. Like, sometimes I don't like following up in the first few months because there's an air of uncertainty. It's like, I don't know if I like it or not yet. Or,
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure if he's making it or not, right? And then 6 months or a year later, the person's been promoted and everybody's super happy, right? But you could eliminate a lot of that nebulous initial stage by doing something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And so we've touched on the client perspective. How have candidates changed over the years in terms of their expectations, their loyalty, and their mindset overall?
And I think there's a lot of changes in there. Like, it used to be, earlier in my career, where the most valued thing by employer was longevity at a firm, right? And now that just doesn't happen as much. You don't get a resume where the person spent 15 years in the same company, and he's only 40 years old, right? Or 35 years old. That's fairly rare. It's still valued, as long as you never know. Some people have spent the same year 15 times in a row. Doesn't necessarily, but that used to be really valued a lot. Um, but basically, candidates' attitude is more, they have more ownership of their life and their career than they used to, right? And I don't know if it's my background, working class background, but it would be like, someone offers you a job, like, oh my God, a job, great, I got to take it, and now it's like, okay, is this job good for me? What's the salary? What are the benefits? And, hopefully they're thinking also, where will this job take me?
Mhm.
Where will this job take me in my career? What is the development path? Will I gain the skills and experience I want? So I think there's more empowerment by employees. And I'm sure, I'm sure forever there's always been, people who had that, point of view. That's not like
Mhm.
it's not like it never existed. But I would say in general, across the entire spectrum of employees, it's more and more prevalent, which is great to see, right? And I think that's so important. And,
Yeah.
I was so impressed with my son when he was offered, he moved into the nonprofits sector. And he said to me, I really like this. It's First United. We're doing the coldest night of the year walk on Saturday, right? He says, I really like these people. I looked at research. They're award winning, in terms of fundraising. They're really together. The salary is less than I want, but I think the upside is better. So I want to take this job, right? So, he was willing to see that. Now, obviously not everybody is individual. So everybody has to know what's best for them,
Yeah.
right? And for one person, having a lower salary and living closer to work is more important than, a more aggressive upside at a different company with more stress. So, I think that's so important is you have to understand, okay, what's best for me and
Mhm.
then follow that. And that's really important. And as recruiters, we need to respect and honor that, right? Again, we're not going to force or push somebody. Obviously, we want to present an opportunity. But I think, and the other thing is candidates can research now.
Mhm.
When I was looking for work and, and even in business, looking to do business development for Goldbeck Recruiting at the beginning, you go to the library and you ask them for their data, and they'd give you these big binders of industrial indexes and stuff right now. So now you can and research a company that you're interested in working in. You can research people that work there online. You can edit your resume for each individual application, right? And sometimes you hear like I sent out 500 applications and I didn't get any responses. Well, who did you send it to? Did it have we'll still get resumes for a sales position that says experience looking for a career in operations management. Okay, so if you're blindly
Yeah.
sending out resumes,
Yeah.
well, of course people aren't going to get back to you, right? So, but you have that ability now to do that, which is great. So, if you can, as a job seeker, especially as a young person looking for a career, can really research the types of companies, that you might want to work for, really get to know them, develop a plan to develop relationships or monitor who they're hiring or find your way into or to develop the skills or another course or two to get you in the door of that kind of company, right? Those are opportunities that are much easier now and make a really provide really good opportunities for people.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like your point there when you were saying that it's really important that they understand what's important to them, and especially those,
Yeah.
and in today's world where we see someone maybe in an industry for 10 plus years, but they're open to the concept of pivoting over to a different industry or different sector, as they navigate the next steps of their career change. And so you've also supported many people through their own career changes over the years. And so what would be something that you would say leaders often underestimate about how change impacts people on a human level?
Well, I think that's a really good point because we see all sides and, again, three clients, employers looking for the exact same position could give us totally different parameters. I'll never forget, one of my very first searches when I started working in the industry for another recruiting firm was a wire rope, manufacturer, a cable manufacturer in Richmond, and they were looking for like a fairly junior production scheduling type individual. And they insisted that person needed wire rope experience. And without wire rope experience, no one could ever understand our business, right? And so the rigidity, I don't know if I ever placed that position or not. I don't know if there was another wire rope manufacturer in BC at the time, right? You know, so, and that still happens, but why wouldn't you as an employer be open-minded to someone from another? It's not like we're going to send you a shoemaker, right? It's not like you should consider like a landscaper, but maybe someone from a different industrial manufacturing background with skills and experience, right? Who, so you're really closing the door to great potential, great candidates. And yeah, a great candidate, they may have to come in and learn your industry at it, but that's easy, right? It's not that special. It's not that difficult. But they're going to could bring a way of thinking of how to solve problems, how to make things more efficient, how to deal with waste product in your wire rope manufacturing, how to do the schedule changeovers for different sizes of rope, how to think about it in a way you know, that's really good. Now I'm talking about old industry way back now, everyone thinks that way, in modern manufacturing, but it's just an example of how by opening the parameters a bit, and we always ask ourselves, what parallels, what industries are parallel, right? I always think about in terms of concentric circles. Okay, the candidate you want is the bullseye. And that's what we want to find for you. But what's the next circle out from that bullseye? And what's the next circle out from that? And what would make that person a good fit, right? And then with the client is, understanding, okay, if we did that, what would the essential skills be and experience? Like, what is it you absolutely cannot get by without? So it could be like they've worked with an ERP, or they've done, if it was in supply chain, they've worked with international suppliers or with just in time or things like that. Or if it's sales, what size of sale and sales cycle, and at what level of the organization were they selling? Were they knocking on doors, or were they dealing with head offices and CEOs, right? So, look at those types of similarities amongst industries, and then looking for great people who would want to learn your industry.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, like, it comes understanding the non-negotiables and what success really looks like in a position for a candidate, for them to be able to be successful and to thrive in the role. I know we talked a little bit about this earlier around AI, and now working with, especially within larger companies, they are using applicant tracking systems a lot more often. And so with candidates applying to a number of different roles, this tool can actually start screening, to pick up certain keywords and to see if it matches the qualifications for the role. And so as AI continues to evolve, where do you think it really helps recruiting, and where does human judgment still matter the most?
It's interesting now because there's always, I obviously get a lot of, as an owner of a company, I get a ton of emails of, people trying to sell you something, right? And now everybody wants to sell you something that's AI related. And, I look at it with a little bit of not a little bit, a lot of cynicism, right? It's like all of a sudden, it's like when organic became a thing. Well, all of a sudden everything was organic, or if when you buy bottled water, it says gluten free, right? So everything is marketing. Um, but I think the tools, as it gets better for a recruiter, like really, for example, really basic AI, if you could even call it that, would just be like, how good are the filters and how flexible are the filters and of different ways to search a database, right? That's so important, right? As it gets better and better. And then set up filters that run automatically in the background. I don't even know if that probably doesn't even qualify as AI. Using AI in the process, I think, of in more of the workflow process, more so than the really identifying of possible candidates, other than really basic, looking at 100 possible candidates for a position. I wouldn't trust AI right now to give me the 5 that I should call. I would probably trust our researcher to go through those 100 or 200 and give me the 30 that I should consider to find the 5 or 10 I should call, right? But doing a workflow where the resume is summarized, the contact is supported by that, other putting attributes of companies, like where could a person work that 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 I would want to recruit for a particular position. So putting, um, non-label characteristics in into an AI program that could then find you that 200 companies within the New Jersey area that we could reach out to, who we could research, who may employ somebody like this, or then having AI put that into LinkedIn to spit out 200 candidates for Legion to review. So I think there's a lot of processes like that, which, I've got a friend who's way smarter than me, and he really thinks about those things. You should probably interview him. But I think the workflow process, the research process, there's a lot of ways it could become more efficient. At the end of the day, I don't think you can trust AI to disqualify candidates at a certain level or to qualify them for contact. So.
Okay, no, thank you, Henry, for that insight. All right. Well, now we are moving into what's called the lightning round. Do you
All
like
right.
playing games? Do you like games, Henry?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I
Sounds
don't. I'm
good.
not a game player, but
No.
I am happy to.
Amazing. So, with the lightning round, I'm just going to read a phrase or a question, and you can give me the first word that comes to your
You
mind,
have
or
to
you can
ask
just
me
answer
of
the
my
question.
funniest resume story, though. That's obligatory at
Okay,
some
let's hear
point.
it.
Let's
Let's hear
hear it.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, let's hear
All right. So I have to tell this story because it's like 35 years old and it'll never leave me. So I
Oh, I
received
love
a
it.
resume. I received a resume in the mail in an envelope, and it had a cover letter. And the cover page, it was cover page, not cover letter. The cover page had a black and white passport side photo copied onto it, right?
Yeah,
And on the top of the little black and white photo, it said the person's name,
yeah.
and underneath the little black and white photo, it said not actual size.
Oh,
So and it's funny, like I tell that joke, and it is funny, but really, it's so human. You could really understand it. In some ways, it's like, who would do that? It's so like dumb. But you can understand someone fretting. People looking for a job is scary and it's hard. So
yeah.
he's looking at this, and his fear, or his angst of finding a job and not and saying the right thing and being worried about doing the wrong thing causes him to do this really sort of funny, stupid thing, right?
That is so
But
funny.
it
Yeah,
is, right? And
yeah,
but it really makes me feel for job seekers, right? Because it is hard to be a job seeker.
yes.
Less so now, because people are more used to it, more used to changing jobs and finding new jobs. But there's all this element of, skills and experience aside, I'm going to be judged as a person. My soul, my humanness, my person is going to be judged. And that's scary, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
you have to have empathy for people. And really, I always have a lot of empathy looking for work. And I wish we could find everybody a great job. We can't. So we always want to at least be respectful and as kind as we can be, given the
yeah,
volume of, people we have to deal with. So,
yeah,
sorry, I
yeah.
interrupted your lightning round.
No, 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 that is great. And I love that story. And I think it just really brings back like the human element to it, because right now it's so easy for people to just apply through their laptops or through their computers. But overall, like it's a very scary process for job seekers, and because they are vulnerable, they're
Totally.
putting themselves out there, and sometimes it can be a time of great uncertainty for them. And so, nonetheless, it's always daunting sometimes for most.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Henry, for sharing that
Okay.
story. I love that. All right, so moving into lightning round. One recruiting myth you've never believed.
Oh, man. Okay, well, boy, that's hard. I've never believed that if someone makes one typo on their resume, you should not consider them as a candidate. Like, that's just stupid.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Hire for character or experience?
You have to balance character and attitude with, the essential amount of experience, right? You can teach a lot, but you can't always teach attitude. So I think, attitude and character should be, prime, but you also have to have, a requisite within that. You have to have the requisite level of experience. So that's always a balance, but you can't ignore character and attitude.
Great. Best career advice you've ever given?
Wow. Okay, don't put not actual size under your passport size photo. So I think I think doing what's most important to you, understanding that you're an individual. What you want to do is important, and that working hard to do that. But I think the most important thing I would say is uh, looking for work is in terms of looking for work versus career advice, is looking for work is a process, and you can't control what the response is going to be to any of your applications, right? You have no idea what's happening at the side of the person who has who is looking at your resume. You don't know. Maybe maybe they have already made a decision, but their company, maybe they really want someone who is like right out of school with very little experience. Maybe they're really stuck on experience exactly in the wire rope industry, right?
Yeah.
You can't control that. And you can't control what's going to happen even after a first interview or a second interview, or even if they say, oh well, we might want to hire you. You have very little control. And so waiting by the phone is the worst thing you can do, right? It will make you crazy. But what you can control is how many companies' jobs you're going to research, how you're going to customize your resume and your outreach, how you're going to follow up on, what's your activity going to be. You can control those things, and you should never stop doing those activities until you've signed a contract to
Mm,
start work. And doing those things will keep you sane during your job search process, and it will make you more effective because you will feel stronger in yourself if you're comfortable the fact that you're going through all these steps every week, and you're going to be successful at some point. You just don't know when, where, and with whom. But
hmm.
that's really, I would say, something I try to tell job seekers.
Love that. One quality every great recruiter needs.
You need to be Okay, this is a psychologist who tested me before my first. I saw a psychologist before I joined my first recruiting firm, and he talked about a continuum of thoroughness and expediency, right? So you need to have that. You need to be somewhere in that continuum. Like if you're only expedient and mercenary, right, you're not going to be a good recruiter because you're going to do some of the things we talked about, right? I think every candidate is, send candidates in before you've interviewed them, or if they're not a fit, you're going to tell everybody they're the best fit for everything. And, but if you're too thorough, you're never going to get anything done. You need to push this process forward. And sometimes it's like pushing a string, right? There's nothing to push. So, you have to do your research. You have to find the candidates. You have to interview them. You have to get in front of the clients. You need to push it forward, and you need to work on the next search, and push it forward, and you have to keep doing it that way with the same amount of diligence and thoroughness. I think of Alessia when I talk about that, right? Again, we've got several great recruiters, but when I think of that, like she's always going to be thorough. She's going to go through her steps, but she's always going to be moving forward, moving forward, moving forward. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be successful, because in order to make a living, it's not like you have one search. You have one search and that's your career. You have to be, filling searches all the time. And that's how you can do that successfully, is having work ethic, and stubborn diligence and work ethic. Sorry.
No,
You
that's
asked for
great.
lightning round. I'm the wrong person to have a lightning round with. Sorry.
No, this is great. Henry, you have so much great insights. This is gold. Like these are golden nuggets. So thank you. The last one is one lesson you'd pass on to the next generation of recruiters.
Yeah, I would say value value what you bring to the table, especially with all the competition, in-house competition, AI, everything. You have to value the fact that you can understand what a client is looking for. That throughout the search, you're going to understand that better and better. You're going to be listening to the client. You're going to be, changing and adapting the search, and then you're going to be able to stubbornly work as hard as it takes to find potential candidates for that position, right? And that's not something that AI can do, and it's not always something that an in-house recruiter can do, because they've got a lot of positions that they can be a little bit bureaucratic at times, right? So you can really solve a problem for this employer by finding them the right fit, by doing the hard work of reaching, looking at hundreds and hundreds of profiles, reaching out to people, interviewing them, making good common sense, practical assessments of them, referring to you provide a tremendous value to companies and to individuals, right? And if you can do that, you'll make a good living as well.
Wow, Henry, that was such great insight. And what really stands out to me is that while the tools and the markets change, the fundamentals don't. So judgment, integrity, and relationships will always win. And so thank you so much for sharing the perspective that only experience can bring and for the legacy that you've built in this industry. If you found this valuable, share it with a leader or HR professional in your network. At Talent Harbor, we believe great companies are built by how you hire, lead, and treat people. And conversations like this remind us why that matters. Thank you so much again, Henry, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was great. I really enjoyed it.